Hello to all you lovely rock and metalheads, and welcome to Pyrotechnics episode 3, brought to you, of course, by Fireworks Rock and Metal magazine. Issue 102 is in the stands now, 164 pages of rock and metal goodness, containing more reviews and more interviews than any other magazine for your viewing and reading pleasure. You can trust us. We're fast becoming the nation's #1 magazine for all things rock and metal. I'd like to thank everybody who's taken the time to give us feedback for these podcasts. It's very much appreciated. We're taking on board some of your comments, but if you do like what we do on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And if you like what we do on Spotify, also please rate and comment. It does help the channel grow, helps us get to more people, and hopefully gets the good word out about rock and metal to more people out there. I'm very pleased to be joined today by another two heavyweights. We have in the red corner the Deputy Editor, Dave the Destroyer Cockett. And in the blue corner, we have James the Juggernaut Gaden, our art editor, who does a fantastic job of putting the magazine together. Welcome, chaps.
Hello, everybody.
Hiya. Right, now let us get going. So the first topic we're going to discuss today is a bit of a thorny one in lots of respects, and that is reissues. Are there too many reissues nowadays? Do they cheapen the original? Are they even worth the cost? And what implications are there to Fireworks Rock and Metal magazine? To start us on this one, I'm going to throw this over to our deputy editor, who I know has some very strong views about them. So, Dave, off you go.
Yeah, it's a bit of a sliding scale if you think about it. At one end, you've got all the old stuff that was long out of print, limited print runs to start with, fetches an arm and a leg on eBay or Discogs or whatever. Some little label comes along and says, yeah, we'll acquire the rights to it properly, do it a great job of it and stick it out. No problem with that whatsoever. Get behind that any day of the week. Then you get the labels that start out like that and realize, actually, we can't make any money doing this. So what we're going to do is we're going to reissue things that are a bit more popular, a bit easier to get hold of, because we think there's a bigger audience. You can see that up to a point. When they start saying that this has been remastered, this has been tweaked or whatever, what they actually mean, it's been re-EQ'd, i.e. they've turned it up. Well, I've got a volume control on my hi-fi that'll do exactly the same job. So are they worth the money? We're then getting a little bit suspect. We then slide a little bit further down and we get to the bigger guys. And we've seen lots of reissues of late from some of the giants from the past. Again, these are good, bad, and indifferent. You have the things like Thin Lizzy, Alive and Dangerous, which I'm a huge fan of. I bought the original vinyl. I bought the original CD. I bought the remastered CD. And then what we get is that somebody comes along and says, you know what, we'll put out an 8-disc version. And first thing you start thinking is, oh God, why have they done that? But in this instance, pretty much like UFO did a couple of years ago with the Strange in the Night set, what they've actually done is that they've gone back to the original source material, all the original shows that made up those 2 live albums, and they've put all of it on there. And certainly in the case of Thin Lizzy, the guys who remastered it, they've smartened it all up. And it sounds great. My missus looked at me, got out when I said, oh, when I get this Thin Lizzy, what do you want to spend that sort of money on? What's basically 8 discs of the same show? I'd see where the layman's coming from in that regard. But I think that that's a great historical document. That's fine. Then at the other end of the scale there, we have the things that are being remastered for the sake and reissued for the sake that they're being reissued. And the same things come out every couple of years. And I start to think, well, they're taking the piss. They're expecting fans of the original to buy what's essentially the same thing, just a little bit louder. And the sweeteners that they offer, there's a disc of the guitarist fighting in the control room, and all sorts of outtakes like that. Well, they're the sorts of things that you listen to and you listen to once. Just to say that you have, then if you ever pull it off the rack again, you go back to the original album and just play that. So really, what's the point? Particularly with the stuff that's still readily available, all it smacks of to me is you've got record companies that are desperate, that they just want to try and squeeze sales out of people that's already bought the original. Then you get reissues of things that actually just themselves came out a couple of years ago, which might be because a band wasn't particularly popular back then, but they've seen a bit of an explosion. The Nesters a great case in point. Now, the Nester album they did themselves was a great Scandi rock album. Then, once that album came out, on the back of those 3 videos that they put on YouTube, everything exploded for them. 2022 for them has absolutely been a phenomenal year. It's been a real Cinderella story. So then they get picked up by a label. The album gets reissued with 3 bonus tracks, only one of which really is worth listening to, because it is actually a proper new song. The other 2 you can forget. One's a ridiculous cover, and it just in some respects it cheapens the original to me. And if you don't have the original yet, go ahead, buy that. If you do have the original, is it worth the investment? Nah, definitely not. Then, right at the very bottom, we've got the thing that really boils my piss, you'll pardon my French, is we get the infamous tour editions. A band releases an album, then 6 months later they go out on the road and the record company chucks it out again, different sleeve, extra track, and basically they're trying to charge the same bunch of fans, which, let's face it, the people who bought it when it first came out are more likely to be the people who are going to see them, so they try and flog it to them again. And the sad thing is that whilst it might be seen as a bit of a short-term fix and a sticking plaster for the record industry, particularly when we're talking about some of the bigger names, is that all it's doing is it's taking away ready disposable income from new stuff. So you've got the people out there that's paying 70 quid for a Sabbath box set. That, I mean, and I did. I went out and I certainly bought Sabotage. But you look at those sorts of prices and you think 70 quid, well, actually, I could get 5 or 6 new CDs for that. So that's 70 quid that ain't going to find its way into the pockets of people making new music. So ultimately, it's a downward spiral. All we're doing is, if we're going to keep regurgitating the same stuff around again and again and again, there's going to be less new music available. There's going to be less quality new music available because there's no budget available to do it. And as I say, it just adds to the death of the CD, the death of the industry. That's my take on it.
I mean, all throughout this, James, I've noticed that you've been nodding your head, obviously agreeing with what Dave's been saying. I know that you are a massive Queen fan, and I know that they've obviously done quite a few reissues as well. I mean, where do you stand on this? What do you think about all this?
I agree with quite a lot of what Dave said. I buy quite a few reissues. Rock Candy are one of my favourite labels because they, for me, do it right. They do, like Dave said, a lot of the remastering is just, this is louder. With Rock Candy, a lot of their albums do sound significantly better than the originals did. They provide a nice booklet with some actual proper documentation and some nice old photos. They're in quality cases and they're well priced. So they're Rock Candy, great, no problem. And then you get some of these deluxe editions. So like you say, Queen, the Miracle one came out. I love the Miracle album, but I didn't buy this reissue one because I looked at what the extra bits were on it and I was like, well, okay, so you've got one, they say it's a new track. It's not, it's an old track that they've now made out of what was left lying about. And then the whole album again, but in studio, sort of like Dave says, studio work in progress form. I've listened to it once. I streamed it just out of curiosity, and there's Freddie said this, and there's a bit of chat in the background, and then that's it. I would never listen to that again. So that makes no sense. So, and then it's like a lot of the deluxe ones. I remember Rainbow, when they came out, there was like Rainbow Down to Earth. The bonuses on that were just embarrassing. It was like, who would pay for these? Just dreadful. So I don't bother with a lot of them. The one I think who's absolutely nailing it at the moment is Whitesnake. Yeah. Because with Whitesnake, David Coverdale hasn't just remastered them, he's actually remixing them and he's putting in extra bits. And then he issues them in a variety of styles. So if you want, like Dave said, the whole kit and caboodle with all the, this is what we did in the studio and here's how we worked it out, here's the demos, you can buy the big box set that costs about 80 quid. Or you can get a 2-disc version where you've got the album remastered and the album remixed. So that's a bit to me like when you get a film and there's a theatrical cut and a director's cut. It's a bit like that. Or you can just buy the brand new remix on its own, and it's available on digital and it's available on streaming. So they aren't cutting anybody out there. So if you do that, I haven't got a problem with it. But then you get like the Dear Holy Dive one where it's like, yeah, there's a brand new remix in this, but it's only available in this set, which you have to buy, and it costs an arm and a leg.
I mean, do you think, Dave, as well, that some of these are just out to fleece the fans? Is there any benefit in them at all?
I can't see any other reason for doing it, to be honest, because they can't sell new material. Dio is a completely different kettle of fish, and don't even get me started on what they're doing to the Dio legacy. They seem to be milking it for all it's worth. As I said to you, in terms of introducing new fans to the music that weren't around when it first came out, I get that. It's like, for example, the unboxing video you did the other day, Pete, a rap. There are going to be people out there that will like rap that weren't around back in the day, like us old farts, that don't remember those albums, that didn't buy them. So yes, I get that that's a way of introducing that music to those fans. And when you're charging 30 quid or so for a CD box set, that's fair enough for 5 albums. It's when you start looking at 125 quid for 5 slabs of vinyl that then I start to think, hang on a minute, that's just taking the wee a little bit. And it, as I said, what it does is that I'm not knocking anybody that buys them. I'm not knocking anybody that's either a new fan or an old fan that they must have everything that ever came out. Absolutely, that's between you and your conscience. But what it does is it means that there's less disposable income available to new music, to new product. Therefore, the whole thing spirals downwards. So I don't see it as anything other than a cheap, easy way to make money by an industry that really hasn't got a clue what to do.
I mean, picking up on something you just said there, Dave, throwing it back over to you, James. I mean, do we think that all the reissues that are coming out, are they starting to suffocate new bands?
Yeah, possibly. Like Dave says, it does. Certainly, my disposable income's a lot less than it used to be. I'm a lot choosy with what I'm buying now. So, if it's, I could buy this, which I actually already own a copy of, or I could go buy a brand new album by a brand new band. There's a discussion to be had there. There was a time when I'd just buy the lot, but that's no longer possible. So, yeah, you definitely have to be a lot more choosy with what you've got, and it really does depend on what value it's offering. If it's going to be a significant sonic upgrade, or there's a new live show that was never released, maybe. But if it's just, yeah, this is louder and here's some stuff from the studio that was never going to see the light of day anyway, then I really don't see the point.
I mean, what do you chaps want in a reissue? I mean, James, you mentioned some good points already about, unseen stuff, unheard stuff. I mean, what else? I mean, like the Rat set that we did, it had a backstage pass, a brochure from the archives of the band. There was a poster in there. I mean, but that seemed to be pretty standard fare nowadays.
Well, any information, as James alluded to earlier, Rock Candy are pretty good at it. You'll get a booklet with the reissue that'll sort of tell you the story of the band and the making of that album, and that's great. That's a nice little historical piece. But you mentioned there, you get a backstage pass. Well, what's that going to get you? A backstage pass. It ain't going to get you into one of the gigs. It ain't going to get you up close and personal. It's just something that they can stick in there. It's like a plectrum with the band's name on. You get those sorts of things. What I think is that, firstly, if you want to do reissues properly, look to Rock Candy, who's already been mentioned, or look to how they've done it with the UFO and with the Thin Lizzy. Because what they've actually done there is, to me at least, they've done something that's worthwhile. They've taken something that was actually the culmination of a lot of work. In Lizzie's case, for example, they took 7 shows, condensed those all together down into one. And that, to me, I can hear that whole source material, what they worked from, and it all sounds fantastic. So that is worthwhile, and that's worth that extra mile. But They are few and far between, and lots of them, particularly on vinyl. Vinyl seems to be a fad. And I get that vinyl's more expensive to press because the pressing plants that used to be there aren't. Because we moved on from those in the late 80s and the 90s when we moved on to CD. But to charge the money that they're charging for four sides of vinyl, and that seems to be the other thing these days to justify it, an album has to be pressed on four sides of vinyl. Two used to work. It worked fantastically well for Leopard when they did Hysteria and got 60 minutes on two sides of vinyl. So, you know, it just seems to be gimmick led rather than actually producing anything really worthwhile.
James, do you agree with that?
I do. Yeah. If like there was for example, Bryan Adams' Reckless that got reissued, Sonics, and there was a live show with it. That's fine. I'm happy with that. But if there was say, oh, and here's Brian sat with an acoustic guitar in his bedroom figuring out the chords, I wouldn't be interested in that. That's not a selling point. And you know, like you say, oh, this is what the backstage pass looked like in 1988. So not bothered. So for me, what Rock Candy offer is great. Improved Sonics, some backstory, and a nice price. I'm quite happy with that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So, Dave, I mean, obviously you get a load of these requests, you get a load of these sort of reissues sent to you. I mean, what kind of impact does it have for the magazine? Are you tending to turn them away, or are you sort of saying, yeah, okay, we'll do this, we'll review this?
Well, it's really, to be fair, it's more Dave Scott's area of expertise. He's the reviews manager, but he and I have spoken about it from time to time, and we're having to rein it back because who wants to read 20 pages of reviews about albums that were initially released 40, 50 years ago to the detriment of new stuff? The whole thing that keeps the scene going is new stuff. There comes a point where I'm as guilty as anybody. Led Zeppelin. How many more Led Zeppelin remasters do we actually need? It's got the original vinyl. You got the first time it came out on CD. You got the first time it was remastered. You got the 12th time it was remastered. It's just ridiculous. So we're consciously having to rein it back because the flood's increasing. There's more and more of it. And as I say, as James said earlier, I think it's getting to a stage where we're having to separate from what we see as the wheat from the chaff, because there is just so much noise out there. It's hard to point people in the direction of something that's worthwhile. I know that people will have different opinions. As I said, it depends on whether you heard it the first time, whether you've got it already, whether you've not got it. But ultimately, our role is to promote new music, not to promote old music.
Indeed.
Well, to that point, I get quite a few reissues to review off Dave Scott, and some of them are really difficult because you sat there thinking, just look at some of the albums we've named that were reissued in the last few years: Rainbow Rising, Down to Earth, Heaven and Hell, Holy Diver. There's no point reviewing that in a rock and metal magazine because everybody who's reading it will already own those albums in some form. If they haven't, they need to seek medical attention. So it's like basically you're just listing what makes this version different. So you might as well just read the product review on Amazon or something like that. And it was like, I got one a couple of issues back and it was a Silverhead box set. And I love Michael DeBar. I think he's great. And I was looking, I was like, I'm sure I've reviewed these. And it was only like 3 or 4 issues ago, which is only like sort of a year ago. And they came out on Purple Records. And then Cherry Red have picked it up and put it in one of their little clamshell box sets. So the 2 studio albums were identical in terms of content to what had already been reissued only like a year previous. And then they just bunged in 3 live shows, all of which were just bootlegs. They weren't proper, you know, like sound desk. It was like audience recorded bootlegs that I could have probably found myself on the internet.
Well, some very, very strong views there. I mean, people listening, what do you think? Do you like reissues? Have you got any? Do you rate them? Would you go out and buy them if they were advertised and you fancied it? You know, let us know your views and opinions as well. It's a debate. We want to get your views. Gentlemen, thank you very much for that. That was very, very good. Before we now move on to the next topic, I just want to say, Alice Cooper, the single School's Out, 51 years old. 51 years old, people. I read that, and I must admit, the first thing I thought is I have to lie down now. 51 years old. If I didn't feel old before, and I certainly felt old reading that. My God, honestly. Right.
Make you feel even older if you want, Pete.
Say again, mate?
You want to make you feel even older?
Go on then.
I wasn't born when that came out.
No,
Short up.
neither was I. Sorry, Dave. Sorry to bring that up, mate. And the worst thing is, well, the album's not actually 51 until the 30th of June. The single came out on the 26th of April, but 51 years old. And still a classic as well, even to this day.
Absolutely.
Right, let's move on. So, being the social media manager, obviously, I read lots of posts, lots of tweets, ranging from the sublime to the basically bloody ridiculous. But what I caught my eye this time around, and this is one that James will be interested in. The poll, I don't know who it was from, but these are always 10 a penny, so I don't know if it was an official one or if it's just a fan-based one, but it said that Brian May had been voted the world's best rock guitarist. You know, it's a very bold claim. And like I say, I'm sure that next week somebody else will get the title, and then the week after that, someone else. I thought, as a Queen fan myself, I thought that's actually a fairly good shout. But I know that James is the uber Queen fan. So I'm going to throw this one over to James. Brian May, the world's greatest rock guitarist. What do you think?
Short answer, no, because I've got no idea how you would actually define what is the world's greatest rock guitarist. It's if I had to make my top 10, he'd absolutely be in my top 10, but I wouldn't know what order to put them in because there's so many different ones of so many, I could say like Steve Vai's more than likely a technically better player than Brian May, but he's not written anything like We Will Rock You that's become part of popular culture. So, there's, for me to say Brian May's a rock guitarist is sort of downplays what he's actually done in the music industry. He's a phenomenal songwriter as well as being a guitar player. He's a very good all-round musician, and he's done a lot of stuff that isn't just rock. To me, if you said rock guitarist, I immediately start thinking of people like Angus Young. That's what I would say is a rock guitarist. Brian May is like a lead guitarist, but he's played in so many different genres, not just with Queen, but with his solo stuff. The stuff he's done with Kerry Ellis, where he's gone into more West End sort of styles. He's done film soundtracks where he's like scored it orchestrally and done it all instrumental. So I think rock guitarist is a bit of a misnomer when it comes to Brian. He'd certainly be up there in my list, but I have got no idea how you would pick one person to be. He's the guy.
So if I said to you then, James, if I was going to put you on the spot and say your number one rock guitarist of all times that obviously that you know of, would you be able to give me an answer?
No, I mean, my personal favourite player is Paul Gilbert because I've not come across anything that Paul Gilbert can't do. But Paul Gilbert has not had the impact on rock music that Ritchie Blackmore has, or Brian May has, or Jimi Hendrix has, or Eddie Van Halen has. So it opens up. It'd be like if you were to ask me who the best singer is, I could say Freddie Mercury, Tom Jones, and Glenn Hughes. They're all phenomenal, but not one of them's like the other.
Dave, what do you reckon to that one?
I pretty much agree with what James says. To be honest with you, I mean, it's like anything. These polls are just an opinion of three randoms that you asked on the way to the pub, and will change if you go to a separate pub tomorrow night. Is Brian May the world's greatest rock guitarist? I've got absolutely no idea. I agree with James to actually just classify him as a rock guitarist is to restrict what he's done, and that doesn't seem fair. Personally, my favourite guitar player is Gary Moore, always has been. Would I say he's the greatest guitar player ever? Well, again, define the greatest guitar player ever. You see lots of these polls, certainly 20 years ago, that would have been topped with the name of Yngwie Malmsteen. Mm-hmm. Yngwie Malmsteen's a great technician, can't write songs for toffee. Certainly not on his own, as his output for the last 20 years has told everybody. Stick him with a great vocalist, a great songwriting partner, and he'll produce something like Odyssey. Leave him to his own devices. He can't deliver the goods. Doesn't make him a bad guitar player. But as I say, there are so many guitar players out there. There are so many great guitar players out there. Some of the ones that James mentioned, Richie Blackmore. Richie Blackmore's influence on rock music he can't be undersold. It's been absolutely phenomenal. Metal, you pick somebody like Tony Iommi. Tony Iommi, the godfather, inventing riffs like that. But you could go back even further to Hendrix. You could go into other fields like Al Di Meola, Alan Holdsworth, people like that. Really, really good guitarists within the genre that they particularly play. And it just says to me that somebody comes along and makes a glib statement like so-and-so is the best guitarist ever or the best vocalist ever. Well, yeah, that's your opinion. And they're like ourselves. We've all got one.
Well, to Dave's point there, where he says about, like Yngwie, great technician, but useless at writing songs. If I've known quite a few like real proper professional guitar players, and they say, oh, Michael Schenker, Randy Rhoads, Eddie Van Halen, they go, fair enough. But for me, Eddie Van Halen revolutionized how rock guitar was played. But you take David Lee Roth away, or you take Sammy Hagar away, and you stick him with Gary Cherone, it's not so good.
Yeah. The point with these, as I said, these polls are 10 a penny, and there's never really any context to them. But it always makes me laugh when they pop up because, it's the proverbial can of worms being opened. I mean, I think there's about, if I remember right from that one post, there's something like 4,000 responses. Each one had a different guitarist, and obviously, sort of begs the point that you guys are making that if you don't put it into any context, it's pretty pointless. But obviously, I knew James was coming on the show, and I thought Brian May. Great lead on because I say such a big Queen fan is James. But I did like what you said about the fact that he's not just a guitarist. He's multi-talented, and it also leads on to the popularity point as well. If you're popular, obviously more people know about you, and therefore you've got a greater reach.
Well, it's like with polls, they're one of two things. They're either there to create debate, much like this podcast is, and that's the case here. Oh, Brian May's the best guitarist. Like you say, 4,000 people jump on. No, he isn't. It's Dave Gilmour, it's Tony Iommi, it's whoever. Or the other thing, like you say, it's popularity, because if you think back to when Kerrang used to do their like best of the year polls, it was usually ruled by whatever had done well at the time. I remember seeing one, and it was like Bon Jovi, Slippery When White had come out. Best singer, John Bon Jovi. Best guitarist, Richie Sambora. Best bassist, Alec John Such. You're like, wait, hang on. Alec John Such is top of a poll here that's got John Entwistle in and Geezer Butler and Billy Shear. He's not even good enough for Bon Jovi. They sacked him. But it's just because that's what was popular at the time.
Yeah. And you look at the polls that would appear in the early editions of Kerrang and look at it 10 years later, and they'd be completely different. Because it's not an opinion poll, it's a popularity contest.
Yeah.
Very true. I mean, I just want to say about Brian May, one thing, Starfleet. I always loved that. I remember getting that one as a kid and being blown away.
Well, his solo stuff as well. He's done two really, really strong solo albums, both of which got reissued recently, so that ties that back. But yeah, they both of them I thought were really good. And I like the stuff he does with Kerry Ellis as well, where he's gone a bit lighter and popular and more musical theatre. He's done a real good job with that. Pretty much everything he's done I've liked.
Brilliant. Well, again, let us know. What do you think? Who is your greatest rock guitarist of all time? Who is your greatest guitarist of all times? As we said, it doesn't necessarily, fit into one little niche. It could be anybody. But let us know, do you have any thoughts and feelings on this as well? Comment down below. Let us know. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our album reviews. This is a review of any stuff that's caught both Dave and James's ear over the last couple of weeks. And I'm going to start with you, Dave. Anything that's tickled the pickle?
Yeah, the new Angel album, Once Upon a Time. I was fairly late to the Angel party. Firstly, because although I'm the oldest one here, I was still too young for Angel originally. I didn't really discover the band until I started work in the mid-'80s. Then a good friend of mine was really into Angel and sort of introduced me to them from there. I was always more into the first couple of albums because they were a little bit more progressive. Rather than the sort of glam pop style that they adopted later on. Not that there's anything wrong with it, just my personal preference. So I was always more of an Angel, hell of a band fan. But as I say, they'd long since disappeared when I got into them. I remember having fun collecting vinyl. I managed to get most of them fairly easily. Managed to even pick up a copy of the live double album Live Without a Net on the local flea market for the princely sum of £4, as I remember. Although the debut album did seem to be quite elusive, and it cost me about £25, I think, in the end when I finally picked up a copy. But since got them all on CD, as you do, thought that they were consigned to the history books until 5 years, 6, 7 years ago. Both Frank Domino and Punky Meadows released solo albums within months of one another. There were 2 pretty good solo albums, and I think from that the feedback that they got seemed to tell them that there was still a market for Angel. So they toured together, started doing their solo material plus some Angel stuff, and it's kind of grew from there into I won't say a full-blown Angel reformation, because you can't have Angel properly without Greg Giuffria. But I saw them in Nottingham a few years ago, and they were great. I never thought I'd get to see Angel, but that was as close as I got, and it was fantastic. They released the Risen album a few years ago, which was very, very good, but to me was more in the vein of the latter albums like Sinful and On Earth is in Heaven, etc. This new album, however, as soon as opening track The Torch kicked in, I thought, wow, that takes you straight back to the Tower and to The Fortune. Very Angel, hell of a band. And it just blew me away. And whilst the rest of the album is a little bit less progressive, it's still no less atmospheric. There's some great songs on there. Frank's still singing great. Punky's still playing great. They've built a great band around them. And it's just great to have them back. I can't give the album enough praise, and I just hope that people sort of delve in and lap it up like I did.
Brilliant. Well, there's one suggestion already. Over to you now, James. Which one's got your attention?
I'm going to cheat and name 2, if that's all right.
I'll go for it.
Because this is one of the perks of working on Fireworks, is when I'm laying out all the reviews, I don't get promos for everything. It'd be ridiculous if I did. But so I sort of read them as I lay them out. And Andy Brailsford reviewed one in the last issue, and it was a Steve Vai release. So we're back to the rock guitar thing again. But it was an album he made back in the 90s with one of his mates, and it's just named Vai Gash. And this guy, he was a biker, and he'd had a horrible accident where he'd been all burned and scarred up, and Steve Vai was real good mates with him because he was into the biking culture as well. And they basically decided that they were going to make this just balls out rock album, the sort of thing they'd like to listen to while they're bombing down Route 66 or whatever his bikers do stateside. And this poor bloke who handled the vocals, he ended up dying, and Steve Vai just lost all interest, couldn't bring himself to finish the record, and he just shelved it. And as much as I appreciate Steve Vai's abilities, and I enjoyed him with Dave Lee Roth, and I enjoyed him with Whitesnake, even though a lot of people didn't, I've never been that bothered about his solo stuff. It's a little bit too widdly diddly, and I'm not really into rock instrumentals, so I'm like, he's a brilliant player, but whatever. But with this, when I read Andy's review, it was like, it's more like something you'd expect from something like Motley Crue or something like that. It's just real, no frills, American hard rock and roll, and this guy's got a little voice on him. So I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. And he wasn't wrong. If you didn't know it was Steve Vai, you wouldn't. There's nothing to. He doesn't overplay anything. He plays it like you want that sort of rock and roll to be played. And the guy singing, he's got like this Graham Bonnet vibe about him. He's unbelievable. So that was a total punt just based on Andy's review, and I was really impressed with it. And what's coming up is actually something on Frontiers, and I've not been interested in much Frontiers have put out recently, but this one I was, and it's the new Michael Thompson album. So another rock guitarist. Nobody ever names Michael Thompson as their favourite, and look at the stuff he's played on. But there you go. But the first Michael Thompson album, How Long, that would be one of my Desert Island discs. I absolutely adore that record. And Frontiers reissued that, I think, in 2007. And that's a classic example of a reissue being worthwhile, because that is definitely an album that needed to be heard again. And I bought that again on the strength of what I was told at Fireworks. Everyone was like, this is an amazing record. So I bought it and totally agreed. The subsequent Michael Thompson band albums have been good, but they didn't have Moon Calhoun singing. And I was like, yeah, okay, this one does. And while he's never going to be as good as he was on that first album, he still does a damn good job for a bloke who's had a hard life and ended up in a wheelchair. He's still kicking the ass of some AOR singers out there. And crucially, they've written all the songs themselves. So it's a real nice, classy AOR album that doesn't sound like everything else that's coming out at the moment. It's just really well put together, really well played, well sung, well produced. And I never expected there'd be another one with Moon singing, and there is, so I'm delighted with that.
Brilliant. So there we go, people. Some great choices already. I want to throw one into the mix as well, and it's a bit of a weird one, but it does have a Brian May connection. So, James, you may well guess what I'm going to say already, but it's a young blues rock lady that's just released an album called 73. It's, I believe her name is pronounced Arielle.
Mhm.
And I must admit, it's very pleasant on the ear, which surprised me. I'm not usually a great blues rock kind of fan, although I do agree with what Dave said earlier on about the great Gary Moore. I mean, that man could turn his hand to ironing and make it look absolutely fantastic. It could sound brilliant. His rock guitaring, his blues guitaring is absolutely amazing. But this one really, really caught my ear, beg your pardon. Some very smooth songs, some great playing. He doesn't seem to use a lot of the old fancy tricky techniques that they do in the studios. It just seems to be pure blues playing, which kind of took me back. You know, it reminded me a lot of actually Brian May's early stuff when he did some of the blues stuff as well. So yeah, I must admit, very, very impressed by that. But yeah, I mean, obviously, go and check these out, people. You know, we're giving you some great advice here to go and expand your listening collection. So do so. Let us know what you think. Have you heard an album as well that you've really enjoyed? You know, chances are we've either reviewed it or we're going to review it. So, you know, have a look, see what you think. Dave, I want to ask you one final thing, mate.
Can I just interject at this point and on the Gary Moore front, as a bit of a Gary Moore aficionado, if you haven't heard Gary Moore on Coliseum 2, go dig out Coliseum 2, because there's some fantastic jazz rock stuff on there, and it includes some of Gary's best playing, in my opinion.
There you go, people. You've been told. Go and get it. I want to ask you one thing, Dave. I know that you also like to read your books, and recently you posted that you may have read one of the greatest biographies of a rock star that you've ever read. You want to give us a bit more? I think it was Mr. Was it not Iron Maiden? The one AC/DC, was it?
Oh, I've just actually finally got around to reading Maximum Overload. It's supposed to be the best AC/DC biography on there. I've read a few, and I'm about halfway through. It's shaping up. Yeah. I mean, it seems real. It seems to go into the sort of depth that a lot of them kind of gloss over. I read Brian Johnson's recently, and whilst I accept that Brian was only a member of AC/DC post Bon Scott, and there was all that history that wasn't there, it didn't really seem to tell me much that I didn't know. And to be honest with you, I think it got to the point where Back in Black came out and they thought, you know what we're going to do is we're going to save the rest and we're going to put another one out so people will buy one more. That was just me. That was just a cynic in me. But this one, I mean, it's just full of great quotes. One I read the other night, it was Bon Scott talking about it's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. And what he was alluding to was he said that it takes a long time to make enough money if you want to fuck Britt Eklund, who was actually, I think, Rod Stewart's girlfriend at the time. And he just made me smile. I just sat there chuckling as I read it, and I thought, yeah. And it's just full of things like that. And he's 20 years old, but the story's timeless. Because the story's the story. It's just a great read. So
also looking to get your opinion on the Richard West, the Thresholds as well, because that's one that I've been wanting to get out of to read as well.
Richard's book's it's well written. It's very down to earth. He takes you through what life is like in a band that aren't at the top tier. Not musically, they're as good as anybody musically, but in terms of their market reach, in terms of what they can actually do. So you get stories about them waiting for tour buses that don't turn up. You get all the things that happen on gigs where 3 people turn up or nobody turns up. And it's just honest, it's down to earth, and it's told with real passion of a guy who loves what he's doing. And it's a great read. If you're a Threshold fan, I think it's a must. If you're not a Threshold fan and you like sort of human interest stories, Richard's books, it's fantastic.
Right. James, do you get a lot of reading done?
Yeah, I'm actually inspired by last episode's podcast. I read the Spice Girls autobiography, and it's charting how they started out and how they ended up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's fascinating.
Or not, as the case may be.
Yeah. We'll draw a line under that one, I think, pretty quickly. Although, to be fair, just to also point out as well that since we had a podcast one where we said that Motley Crue haven't released any new material, we've heard obviously they've scampered back to the studio to do some more. So not that we're claiming that's a victory for the podcast at all, but it was interesting to see after we'd done it. Gentlemen, it has been an absolute pleasure. I knew it would be. Like I said before, issue 102 of Fireworks Rock and Metal magazine is on the stands now. Please go and buy it. It's an excellent read. Not, of course, that we're biased, but we are. But, you know, like I say, we're fast becoming the nation's #1 magazine for all things rock and metal. So, you know, go and read it. You've got nothing to lose. It's, you know, apart from learning lots and lots of stuff and finding lots and lots of new music to listen to. I've been your host, Pete Arnett. It's a goodbye for me, and I shall let Dave say goodbye as well.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening.
And a goodbye from James as well.
Yep, thanks for listening. And like Pete says, buy the magazine, tell your friends. If you don't have any friends, tell strangers. We aren't fussy.
Indeed. And if you can't get it in the shops, of course, go online, www.fireworksmagazine.com. You can order it online as a digital download, or you can order a hard copy as well. So until next time, keep listening to the music that you listen to. Enjoy it. That's what it's there for. And we will see you all again later. Take care, everybody.